Hi, in this video I'm going to show the program called Joy2vJoy, and it's short for Joystick to Virtual Joystick. It's a program I made some years ago, and it's only for the Thrustmaster Throttle and the Joystick also. And it requires you have installed the driver called vJoy. What this program allows you to do is to utilize the off position of the 2- and 3-way buttons on your Thrustmaster Throttle. It's very easy to set up. You just need to install and configure the vJoy driver once, and then you simply need to run this program every time you want to use its feature. You can do some setup, but out of the box, when it's running, it will be working with its default setup. In this video, I'm going to first make a general presentation of the software, as it's the first video I record for this program. And in the last part of the video, I'll show the things that have been added in version 1.3. So new users can choose to see everything, and the old users can choose to skip to a later section. Along with this video, I make a timetable showing which, so you can jump to the section with the new things. First, let me show an illustration what I mean when I say off position. Here I have an illustration of the Thrustmaster Throttle, and as you can see, many of the switches are 3-way position switches. For example, you have the speed brake switch, the boat switch, and the China hats. These are all 3-way buttons. In the forward position, they'll generate one button press. In the aft position, they'll generate another. But when placed in the middle position, it will not generate anything. So in most programs, you cannot utilize this middle position. For example, I use this with DCS, the flight simulator, and the DCS A10, when it was released, many of these buttons had functions that worked in all 3 positions, but you could not make such a profile yourself. And this program I made will allow you to do that. For example, these are the 3-way switches. You also have these 2-way switches. For example, this one, when you put it in the up position, it will generate a button press. However, if you move it to the down position, it will not generate anything. And again, normally out of the box with DCS, you cannot assign a function to this off position, but now with this Joy2vJoy program, it will be possible. The way it works, for example, with this button, when you move it to the up position, the physical joystick will generate a button press, and when you move it to a down position, the virtual joystick that you're installing with the vJoy driver will generate a virtual button press that you can then assign to another function. There are other programs that allow you to do something like this. Voice attack, you can set up to do things like this. Joystick Gremlin probably also can do it, and there are many tools like that. However, many of these tools are not able to generate virtual joystick presses, so they will have to send key presses to your simulator instead. And that it adds an extra layer of complexity, because you need to make a profile for each aircraft. You need to load and activate this program every time you want to fly with that aircraft. This program, on the other hand, you simply just need to start it, and once it's configured, it will be working. So as a downside, many of its features are hard-coded. You cannot change them. The other programs allow that, so if you want to get nerdy and do special things, you should look for other software, but this one is very easy to use. I made it myself back in 2019 when I started flying the DCS F-18. I wanted to use the off positions of these buttons, and I found out I could do it with the vJoy driver. This program is available for download in the user section at the DCS website. And there is a forum note about it. So if you have any comments, questions, you can ask them there. In order to use Joy2vJoy, you need to install the vJoy driver. It's a requirement. When you download my program from the DCS website, user section, file section, you will see this manual I have open here. And in this manual, I have a download link for the latest release of vJoy. Personally, the one I have installed was the one I downloaded in 2018. The original developer of this software stopped developing it, but some other people picked it up, and it's available for download here from GitHub. And you can also find other older versions of vJoy. Installing vJoy and setting it up is extremely simple. You download an exe and install it, and it installs the vJoy driver and some different tools. And you only need to set it up once. Once you have created this virtual joystick, it will be on your machine and be available every time you boot up. So let's look how you create this joystick. Outside the screen area, or the recording area, I'll press Windows Q, and I'll simply search for vJoy. And one of the programs it finds is called Configure vJoy. And I will start that up. On my system, I have already created 6 different virtual joysticks. Joy2vJoy only requires a single, and it have to be the first device. The other 5 I have used are simply used with a plugin I have for my Stream Deck. This plugin allows me to send button presses of virtual joystick buttons. For example, this key in my Stream Deck profile will send button 24 on device number 4. And that's the reason I have 6 devices. You only need 1. Since I already have a 1, I will show you how to create the device number 7. But in your case, of course, you need to select number 1. So first we press the device we want to make. In my case, 7. In your case, 1. And we choose Add Device. And Windows will find this device and start using it. It will take a few seconds. The device will be made with 32 buttons by default. And to use all the features available in Joy2vJoy, we will need 128 buttons. So I will enter 128. You can choose to add point of view hats, and you can choose the axis. Those devices I have made, I have included these axes. However, I don't use them in Joy2vJoy at this moment. So you could skip those for now, but it's up to you. You have to realize that if you make these axes, DCS by default will assign pitch, yaw, and roll to these axes. I will show you later. It's very quickly to remove them in DCS, but it will do that for each aircraft. Since we made an change, we changed from 32 buttons to 128. We need to apply our changes. So I hit apply. And that's it. Now we have created our vJoy device. We can close the configuration program, and unless you want to make new devices, you never need to run it again. I suggest you create your device like you wanted the first time. And the reason for that is these vJoy devices are being generated with a random GUID identifier. And I think it can be a problem in DCS if you start assigning actions to this device and then you delete it or change it and make a new one. If that device have a new GUID, I'm not sure how DCS would react. If the worst case, it will throw away all the actions you have assigned and you will have to reassign them. But that's why you should create your device once like you wanted. So create it with one with 128 buttons and choose now if you want to include the axis or not. And as I said, Joy2vJoy don't use these axes at this moment, but I cannot rule out that I'll make some changes that will use them at a later time. Anyway, we created device number 7 and you should make number 1. Before starting Joy2vJoy, I think it's a good idea to test if it's working. And again, I press Windows Q, and this time I look for feeder. And we have this vJoy feeder app. And again, Windows Q, and there is one called Monitor vJoy. These two programs are installed with the vJoy driver, and it allows you to test if it's working. In your case, you should choose device number 1 as is listed here. But I want to test device number 7 that I just created. So I set the feeder application to device 7, and I set the monitor application to device 7. The way it works is in the feeder application, you can press a virtual button, and in the monitor software, you can see if it's able to read that button you press. So, for example, I press number 12, and we see number 12 is read over here. Number 4 and number 4 is read. So the driver is installed correctly, and the virtual joystick we created is working correctly. So now you can close these down, and you have done everything you need to do with vJoy. As I said before, only if you need to change anything, you need to start these applications. But normally it's something you do one time. vJoy, once it's installed, it will automatic run whenever you start your machine, like every other driver you have for printers and keyboards, joystick, whatever you have. And in order to use the features of Joy2vJoy, you simply need to start Joy2vJoy before you start your simulator. Next, we are going to run Joy2vJoy. I have made a shortcut on my machine where I add the minimize to the program, and that means the program will start up minimized on my system. You can do that at a later time when you figure out that it's working and you have set it up like you wanted to set up. In the very first version I released back in 2019, you manually had to click the activate button. But in version version 1.2, I made it so it will automatic activate. You don't have to press the button. Also, if you have used previous version, you'll see that it now also detects both your throttle and joystick. Previous version was only the throttle. Later in the video, I'll talk about why the joystick is now selected also. You can see down here that in the status window that it have acquired the throttle and have detected it have 32 buttons, and it have acquired the joystick and it has 19 buttons. And the vJoy driver also is acquired with 128 buttons. This program is hard-coded to only work with the Thrustmaster Warthog Throttle system. So if you don't have the throttle, you can simply not use the software. The joystick is optional, but of course some actions will not be available if you have another joystick, but it's not a requirement. And as we discussed before, the vJoy driver is a requirement. Your Thrustmaster throttle and joystick will work as they usually do. They will still send commands to DCS or whatever simulator you use. So when you want to assign actions to these button press on your throttle and joystick, you do it as you done in the past. The only thing is new is how you assign these off buttons. In order to see what the program is doing, you have to click this update checkboxes. The reason it's not checked by default is because it comes with a little penalty. It uses a little more CPU power. So when you're playing your game, your flight simulator, it's a good idea to not enable it. But when you set up this program and do changes, for example, you see these are disabled. So if you want to make changes in here, you have to enable it. But normally you just start it as I did, minimized and don't change anything. So before starting DCS, I simply click this icon and I'm ready to go. But for now, let's enable it. Here in the left side, you see the 32 buttons of the throttle. And whenever I hover the mouse over one of these buttons in this version 1.3, I show a tooltip that tells which button it is on the throttle. So here you can see button 1 is the slew control being pressed. And if I press it on my throttle, you see it's set this check mark to indicate it's pressed. Later in the video, I'll discuss why it's red. It's a new feature added in this version. Over here in the right side, you can see the off buttons that's being pressed. And likewise, they have a tooltip. So when I press this button, the slew control, you see that this virtual button 16 goes off. When I release this one, virtual button 16 goes on. So now you can assign an action to this virtual button 16. I don't think you will need this, but it is now possible to assign a function to the slew control being released. Let's look at our illustration again. For example, the pinky switch we have here on the throttle. When it's moved to its forward position, physical button number 13 will be pushed. When you move to a back position, physical button number 14 will be pushed. So if we try that, I move it to the back position. You see 14 is selected. And I move it to the forward position, and you see 13 is selected. And over here on the virtual buttons, you can see that when it's either in the forward or the aft, this virtual button 13 is off. But when I move to the middle position, when these are not pressed, this virtual button 13 will go on, and this is what allows us to assign an action in DCS or other simulators to this button being put in its off position. Likewise, if we look again at the illustration, we have the flaps button here. It's button 22 and button 23. So if I move my flaps to its forward position, you see 22 is on. If I move it to the aft position, 23 goes on. But when I move it to the middle position, this virtual button 9 will go on being pressed. So again, you can assign an action in your flight simulator to this virtual button 9. These are for the 3-way button, but you can do the same for the 2-way buttons also. Again, let's look at the illustration. Down here, we have these 2 buttons. When you move this one to its up position, it will be button 24 going on. If this one is moved to its up position, it will be button 25. But again, if you move this to a down position, a virtual button will be generated, and this one also moved to its down position, another virtual button will be generated. So let's first switch the EAC on. You see it's button 24, and you can see it's number 6 over here. So when you move it down, number 6 virtual button will be generated. Likewise, the radar altimeter, it will be the physical button 25 when it's moved to its on position, but it will be virtual button 7 when it's moved to its off position. And most of the buttons work this way. I made a special case with the engine ignition switch, and let's look at that on the illustration. It's these two switches, and the way I made it special for those is because in the up position is a momentary switch. It will not stay in the up position. When you release it, it will go down to the middle position. You can put it in the down position or you can put it in the middle position, but in the up position is only momentarily. So the way I chose to do it for these two buttons you have here left and right, when you move it to the down position, for example, the left one, it will be button 18 going on, and then the virtual button will go off. When you move it to the middle position, the virtual will go on, and the 18 will go off. However, moving it to the up position will not change anything here. And I have some suggestion in the manual that I wrote when I was flying the F-18. So I make some suggestion, different ways you can use it for the 18. But let's look at the buttons. We can see it's 18 and 31. So let's see how it's working. Putting it in the down position, you will see that 18 goes on. Moving to the middle position, you'll see the virtual button 3 will go on. And moving into its momentary up position, you'll see 31 will go on. But over here, you will not see any changes. Going back to middle, no changes here. But going down, again, 3 will go off and 18 will go on. And it's exact the same with the right engine ignition down position. It's 19 physical and 4 virtual. Going to the middle position, they will switch. This will go on, this will go off. And in its up position, while I have it pressed up, 32 will go on, but nothing changed over here. So that's a special case. Let's see how we in DCS can assign actions to these off buttons and the physical buttons. We will use the pinky switch as an example. I have it already configured, so I will delete them and then show you how to create them again. But let's first look at that device number 7 we made. As I said, when you make a device, if you choose to include access, DCS will set up functions to that. So here I have chosen the Apache as a pilot. And if I look at the access commands, first of all, you'll see I have a lot of vJoy devices, and the way I can identify them is looking at this GUID. So I have a list so I know which GUID numbers to look for, which is device number 1 and number 2 and so on. But if you have only one vJoy device, it's very easy. And here I'm looking at the access controls. For example, we have the rudder. So as soon as I start scrolling, you'll see that this is the device number 7 we created. DCS will automatic add for collective pitch and roll and the rudder. So what you do is you simply click this one and press clear category, and it will delete them all. And it will do this for every aircraft you have. If I choose this one, it will also have been mapped up. Sorry, I need to choose the axis again. You see, this one I have not yet configured for all these vJoy devices. So for each of these, I would have to click the device, clear category, next, clear category, and so on. But it's something you do once and then it's done, so not a big issue. But let's go back to the Apache and search for NVS. And here you can see that's how they're mapped up. First, we can deal with the physical buttons. So let's clear these. And in the off position, nothing new here. You've done it a million times. And this is, the first was pinky aft, and this was pinky forward. I leave it in the forward position. And now I go to my virtual device, and these are the ones that are being generated by Joy2vJoy. So when I click it and I move it to the middle position, the virtual button 13 will be generated. So you don't need to know it's virtual button 13. You simply let DCS pick it up. Likewise, if we go to the CPG and search for laser, you can see that this is the forward and aft position of my throttle key. My flaps key. They have been detected as button 22 and 23. And if I put it in the forward position, clear this one, double click, and now I move it to the middle position, it's being detected as button number 9. So setting up these off buttons for this virtual device, you do it just the way you do it with all your physical buttons also. And if you want to, I use the paddle switch on my joystick as a shift button, as a modifier. So if I want to record this with a modifier, you can do it. Setting it up in DCS is very easy. Okay, now we have returned to Joy2vJoy, and I will show some of the new things added here in version 1.03. One of the new things is this initial status, but as mentioned before, in order to change these things, you need to enable these update checkboxes. And also, as stated before, you should only do it when you do changes like I do here. If you normally start the program and let it run in the background, it's a good idea to not enable these checkboxes to use least amount of CPU power. This program has been written to be very efficient, so you will not see any problems running your flight simulator. It will not demand a lot of processing power. In this version, I added this initial status. And the reason to have it is before you start a flight, you might want to set the 2- and 3-way buttons on your throttle to predetermined positions. For example, if you use one of the 2-way buttons for your landing gear, if you start cold and dark, it would be a good idea to leave this button in its down position, so the gear is down, and so on. And that is the reason you see these red colors. We saw, for example, if I use the pinky switch aft or the pinky switch forward, they turn red to indicate they are not in their initial position. When you install the software, you will have this all off profile. You will always have this all off. You cannot update it. You cannot delete it. You see the delete is grayed out. If I press add or update, you will see a blank entry field. You will be asked to enter something, and you will not be allowed to enter all off. It have to be something else. For example, as discussed before, let's look this illustration again. You see, I use this pinky switch to the NBS mode. And when I start the Apache cold and dark, I would want it to be in the off position. So what I do is I set all these switches like I want them. In this case, I set the pinky switch in its off position. And then I say I want to make a new profile. And I call it DCS 8864 cold and dark. Okay. Now this is the selected profile, and that is the reason number 14 is no longer red, because it's in its initial state. If I switch back to the other profile, all off, it will be red, indicating this is not the default. But for this profile, it is the default. Right now, the Apache just released a few weeks back, so I'm flying it a lot. I remember how to set these switches to the default position. But there will be periods of time where I don't fly DCS for a long time, and when I return, I might find it difficult to remember before I have my muscle memory refreshed that how to set these buttons. For example, if you go to a mission and you're being shut down and you have to restart, you can open this window, enable the checkboxes, and see, for example, if it was in a different position, I can see it's wrong, and I can move it back if I don't remember which it is. For example, if it's like that, I can see it's the pinky switch aft. It's not pressed, but it's red, so I know pinky switch aft should be pressed, so I can simply move it back. If it's in the forward position, I can see 13 pinky switch forward is pressed. It should not be, it's red. And 14 aft is red also, so simply move it back, and now it's like this. I don't want to make a lot of profiles, but you can, for example, let's look at the illustration again. I use these two switches to my power lever, left and right. In the aft position, they're idle. They're cut off. And in the forward position, they're idle. So if I want to start the Apache in a warm state where the engine is running, I don't want these to be in the cut-off position. So I could simply move them to the forward position and say I want to add or update my profile. It suggests the name of the profile that's current. So I can simply click OK if I want to update this one. However, I want to make a new one, so I give it a new name, simply calling it hot. And I press enter or press the OK key. And now they're no longer red because this is the initial state of this profile. As of now, it does not change anything. It's simply a way of coloring these to remind you how they should be set based on what you do. And you can, here I made two profiles for the Apache, but I can make for other aircraft. For example, for the F-18, I might want to use one of these 2 or 3 way switches for my gear and my hook and wing folding and many things like that. So you could have one with your wing folding where you can make a profile when you are on the carrier and the wings are folded, or if you start inland and the wings are not folded, and so on. but only make them if you feel you need them. I like this feature myself because sometimes I'll be away from DCS for a few months doing other things. And when I return, this can help me remind me how to set it up. The items in this combo box are automatic alphabetic sorted. This all off will always be the first one. And as I said before, you cannot update it, you cannot change it, you cannot delete it. But the other will simply be listed automatic, and that's why I chose to name them as I did with DCS, and then the name of the module, and then different states of that module. Beside saving the states of these buttons, which should be on and which should be off, these information up here are also saved with the profile. And next we are going to look what these things need, what these things do. The profile that is selected is remembered. So if I close down the program, next time I start it up, this profile will all automatically be selected. So in most cases, you simply start Joy2vJoy minimized, and you don't need to look at anything. You just double click the icon and you're ready to go. I recently watched a video by Grim Reaper where he showed how the in-game chat function was working. And one of the things he mentioned was he would like being able to assign two different things for the same button on his controllers. One example he gave was you have two different radios depending if it's an old aircraft or a new aircraft. And he would like to be able to use the same button to control both of them, because they'll not be active at the same time. It will either be one or the other. However, DCS will not allow you to do that. And therefore, in this version 103, I added a function just to do that. And we can do it both with the off buttons and the throttle and the joystick. And that's the reason that you can, we now have support for the Thrustmaster joystick. And let's try to look at it with the throttle first. So I enable this mirror throttle. And what it does is that these 32 buttons on the physical throttle are repeated over here from virtual button 65 to virtual button 96. You see, if I hover here, I see this is the slew control. And this is also the slew control. So if I press the slew control on the physical button, the physical button 1 on the throttle will go on. And at the same time, the virtual button 65 will also go on. And here we have button 15, and it's the same as 78. No, that's wrong. That was the pinky. 79. So this will allow you to attach two different actions in DCS to this button. For example, if I press the mic switch, you will see that physical button 2, but it's also, when we mirror it, is also the virtual button 66. And these mirror functions is the reason that you should create this virtual device with 28 buttons. In previous versions, only 21 buttons was being used. As a minimum, now you have to have at least 22. And the reason it's 22 is because this version also added support for the POV hat, the point of view hats. The cooler switch on the throttle It's not buttons. The mic switch, it have a press function, up, forward, down, aft. They are handled like buttons, but the coolia switch is not buttons. It's actually a point of view switch. So the way it generates data are completely different. So that's why it was not available in previous version. For example, if I put the mic switch in its forward position, you see 21 go off. When I release it, 21 go off on. So if the mic switch is either up, down, left, right, this one will be off. And as soon as I let go to the middle position, it will go on. In this version, I added the same feature with the coolia head, even though behind the screen it's handled completely different. I ignored the diagonal directions, but if it's in any direction other than center, this virtual button 22 will go off, and when it's in the center, it will go on. So now you can assign a function when this switch is centered, just like you can with 21. So even though they implement different ways, they work the same. And as you can see here, moving the the mic switch, you will see that as long as we mirror, these will be mirrored down here also. The throttle have 22 keys, so sorry, 32 keys, and that means we cannot mirror the position of the hat within these 32 keys because they are used for normal buttons. However, the joystick only uses 19 keys, so the position up, left, down, and right mirrored down here from 125 to 126. If I move the coolia hat to its up position, 125 will be set. If I move to its right, it'll be 126, down 27, and left 128. I ignore down here the diagonal because I only had room for these four. I did not have room for all eight. But unless you actually use it as a pow hat to change your point of view, I guess most of you are only using these four directions anyway. So these are mirrored as well. And since they're mirrored, it allows you to assign multiple actions to the same key. So let's see how we do that in DCS. We are now in DCS and gone into settings. And here we have to choose radio, voice over IP. And I want to choose my mic switch forward or right if you prefer. And I want to bind it both to my normally push to talk for the cockpit radio one, and down here for this one, R1, which are for the old style radios. First, I will do it up here, and I will do it for the physical. So it will be my throttle. I simply double click and push the key, and it is the physical joystick button 4. I will then do the same with my virtual device, and if memory serves me well, it's this one, B4. That's a problem having so many. And I go down here, and you see it's the problem was I released it, so it changed to 21. So what I do is I press again, and now I keep it pressed, don't release it, and now it's there as 68. So this is the physical button, and this is the mirrored button. So it's only one button I press on the device, but it's now bound to two completely different actions at the same time. returning to Joy2vJoy, we can do the exact same thing with the stick instead. Now the 19 buttons of the stick are moved to this section. You don't have an illustration of the buttons over here, but for example, if I press first D10 of my trigger, it's normally button 1 on my joystick, but you can see down here that it's repeated in 97. And if I do the second D10, you will see it's the same as 102. And you can see that also when you hover the mouse over these. As I said before, the point of view hats are 8 position and they're handled differently than buttons. The Thrustmaster joystick have 19 buttons, but it also have the trim hat that is a 8 directionally hat. And you see if I press it up, you will see 117 goes on. If I press it up right, it will be 118, right, 19, and so on. They are here all 8 of them. They begin here with hat up, and they end here with hat up left. The only one that's not in use is this 116. So from 97 to 115, it's the 19 buttons. Then we have this one not in use, and the last 8 are the position of this hat switch. So like you saw with the throttle, you can now assign 2 actions to all of the buttons and the hat switch of your joystick. Don't think you have to use this feature. If you don't need it, I suggest you simply leave them unchecked, because things will be easier to set up in DCS. And in DCS, when you set up actions, you can choose which device you are going to set up actions for. So it's not an issue. But if you want to use this feature with other programs, perhaps it will not work, because some programs you cannot tell them which device they should look for. They simply look at all the devices and look at which device had a change, and you have no idea if it will be the physical stick it sees that changes or the virtual. So perhaps you'll not be able to use this feature with other programs, but with DCS it's not an issue. Beside being able to mirror the physical throttle and the physical stick we looked at before, you are also allowed to mirror these off positions in case you want to assign 2 different actions to the same off position. By default, the program, this version 103, works just as the old versions. And this settings called only original 1 to 32. Sorry, 32. Even though only 22 are in use, these 23 to 32 are not in use at this moment. So as we talked about, for example, if I press the slew, you will see number 16 go off. It will be the opposite of this one. So when I let go of this, virtual button 16 will go on. But if I need to bind 2 actions, I can switch to this one called both. And in this case, these first 32 are mirrored down here. So when I push, you see it's both 16 and 48 that goes on or off at the same time. So like I can, if I mirror the throttle, you see it's 1 and 65. So I can bind 2 actions to when I press it. And with 16 and 48, I can bind 2 actions to when I release it. Again, I don't know how useful it is. I can see with the push to talk, when you press it, you would want to attach it to two actions, but probably not so much with a button release or a three or two-way button being put in its off position. But if you need it, you can do it. And I suggest you only enable it if you need it, because things becomes a bit difficult in DCS. When you want to tell DCS or bind these 16 and 48 to an action, normally DCS will look at which button is changing for the device and then bind the action to the button that changes. However, in this case, 16 and 48 are changing at the same time. So when you define this action, if you want to run it, use the program with this mirror of the off button, it have to be set as both. But when you define it in DCS, you will have to choose this one so it can see it's only 16 that's changing. And then when you bind the other action, you choose this one so it can see it's only 48 changing. And when you're finished defining your actions, you can set it to both. And then it will send both, and both action will trigger in DCS. So it's a bit nerdy to use. And as I said, only use it if you really need it. I don't think this is something I'm going to use right now. I haven't had any use for it, so I will probably use it in its default configuration. But I can see myself want to mirror the throttle or the stick, for example. That example with the radio button was a good example for when you want to use two actions, want to bind two actions to the same key. And lastly, you can completely disable this. If you don't want to use these off buttons, but you would like to mirror the throttle, you can completely disable these and do like this. Then you have the physical button and the mirrored, the physical throttle button and the mirrored throttle button, but not the off keys. And these settings you do up here, for example, if I want to have this mirrored throttle enabled, I can save it to this. Right now it's not saved, so as I go to all off and I go back, you see it's no longer active. So I can check it, update, and simply accept with the same name. Now when I go back, it will have remembered this one, and if I shut down the program and start it up, it will be like I left it here because it was saved. So these are the new things added to version 103 of Joy2vJoy.